Okay, sorry about that. Hi everybody, my name is Chris Corvetti. I am a rainwater harvesting specialist. I've been installing rain gardens and rain barrels in the Bay Area since 2017. And I'm very passionate about trying to preserve our local water and keep our potable water for our consumption and give our plants some nice rainwater. Also pretty passionate about reducing pollution in our creeks. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about pollution and runoff as I get started. Um, a lot of people don't think about pollution when they're thinking about rain gardens and rain barrels. They think about just trying to use as much water as we get during the rainy season because we have such dry seasons and crazy heat waves like we're experiencing right now. But one of the other things that these can really help with is reducing pollution in our runoff. So because we live in such an urban area, there are a lot of hardscaped areas where the water can't soak into the ground. And that water runs off into our storm drains, carrying pollutants like pet waste, fertilizers, motor oil, detergents, chemicals, and litter. And all of that water goes into our storm drains, which does not actually get treated. It goes right into our creeks and eventually into the bay. Household wastewater, water that we use in the house and then we flush in our toilets or use in our sinks and showers, that all goes into a sewer pipe and that gets treated. So these are very different things. A lot of people think that the storm drains go to the same spot, but they don't. The storm drains don't actually get treated. So one of the ways that we can reduce the amount of water running into our storm drain and thus the amount of pollutants that that water can carry is with a concept called slow it, spread it, and sink it. This refers to slowing our stormwater down and spreading it out so it has a chance to sink into the ground to nourish our plants and refill our aquifer. The more water that we can prevent from running over our man-made hardscapes, the healthier our local creeks and ecosystem will be. So we're going to talk specifically about rain gardens today and how rain gardens are a great way to slow it, spread it, and sink it, as well as a great way to make your landscape a little bit healthier. Before I get into the rain gardens, everybody always asks me, is there really enough rain in the Bay Area? And the simple answer is yes, otherwise I wouldn't have a job. But the numbers help support that. So 1,000 square foot area of roof can capture over 600 gallons of rainwater from just 1 inch of rain. So we have a nice little equation here with that conversion factor for you. And we're going to take a look at what that looks like in our area. So the US average is 36 inches of precipitation a year throughout the US. Most of the Bay Area averages 15 to 18 inches of rain. So on this slide, I have Alameda County, which is 17 inches. But even with just that 17 inches of rain, so less than half the annual average for the US, you can still get over 10,000 gallons of rain on 1,000 square foot roof. So there is a lot of water, even though it doesn't seem like it. So I'm talking about a square foot roof. What does that translate to for your home? When you want to use these equations, you want to take a look at the roof area that you're actually going to be capturing. Or if you're going to be doing the rebate, you'll need to run these numbers to apply for the rebate. So in this map, you can see in this image, you can see this red dotted line is showing an area of the roof, and I'm going to kind of circle it here, that we would be capturing rain from. That's because we've got 2 downspouts on this part of the roof that's going to run into the rain garden. So we would measure that whole area of the roof. Because our rainwater is only capturing water from that front left side of the house, we would not measure the back areas of the roof because we're not taking any water from that downspout. And we would not measure this little area on the side of the front entryway because we're not taking any of the water from that downspout into our rain garden. And what that means is you can go out and kind of measure from the middle of your sidewall and the length of the area in front of between your downspouts to get a good accurate estimation. On the right here, I have a chart of what water recommends for garden size based on your square footage of your roof. And that's a great starting point to figure out how much water your rain garden will be able to handle efficiently. Now, the other question I get a lot is, can I install a rain garden with my type of roof? And the answer is yes, you can definitely do a rain garden. A lot of people like to install rain barrels to connect into the garden as well. Especially with rain barrels, there are some limitations with roof types. You want to avoid galvanized or untreated metals, just because you're going to get those metal oxides and they're going to concentrate into the water. Any sort of cedar or wood shingles or shakes that are regularly treated with an herbicide or pesticide, you really don't want to be concentrating that water where you're hoping to grow plants, because that's going to harm and kill your plants. And, there are a lot of roof types that don't need to be treated. So if you're not treating your roof, it's not going to be an issue. Solar panels, I get a lot of questions about, are solar panels an issue for this? And solar panels are fine. You can check with the manufacturer to make sure that they don't have any thing that would contaminate the water, but generally they're completely fine. Okay, everyone's here to talk about rain gardens, so let's talk about rain gardens. A rain garden is actually different than any other type of garden that you might have in your landscape. So they are specifically designed to capture, store, and infiltrate the rainwater. Compared to a conventional lawn rain garden or garden, rain gardens allow significantly more water to soak into the ground. Typically, they're designed with native soil either completely removed or amended. And we're going to talk a little bit about soil types, especially in the Bay Area. We have a lot of clay soils. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Using native plants help the rain garden require less maintenance than a traditional garden. And rain gardens are not a pond feature. People, think of them as a swale or a dry pond. They're not designed to hold the water regularly. They'll only hold the water temporarily. So they're actually dry most of the time. It's not a pond feature. Let's take a look at how that works. So this is the anatomy of a traditional rain garden. And a traditional rain garden is dug anywhere from 12 to 24 inches deep. So right here, that full depth is dug out from the garden. And then you have 3 layers. In the bottom, you would have this drainage rock put in. On top of that, you would have a bioswale soil. Now, the bioswale soil is going to be a mixture of perhaps your native soil with compost and sand, or a purchased bioswale soil mix. You're going to add something that's going to help the water to infiltrate in through. You don't want a hard clay surface there because the water is not going to be able to soak through as easily. Now, on the top layer, a traditional rain garden will usually have river rocks, but sometimes you'll also have mulch. So there are some options there depending on, what you're looking for aesthetically. Rocks give you lots of different colors and options, and mulch can give you different colors and textures as well. Traditionally, even if you use river rocks in the swale part, you would use mulch on the berms to help keep that moisture, keep some moisture around the plants, but also just help keep any of that extra water from wanting to flow out by giving it somewhere to soak into. So let's talk a little bit about soil infiltration rates. When you are thinking about doing a rain garden, you might want to see how much capacity your yard has for actually absorbing the water. A very basic soil infiltration test is digging a hole 6 inches deep. You can about 4 inches square or round. Place something across the top of the hole to make sure you have a level surface to measure from. Fill the hole completely and time how long it takes for the water to drain out. It's kind of important to note like how compacted or difficult to dig the hole was, because if you're going to be digging out a whole rain garden, if that 4-inch hole was really difficult to dig, it might be very difficult to dig out a larger garden. If you started to dig and the soil was already really wet, you're going to have different results. It's not going to soak in as well because the soil is already saturated. So, making note of where the soil's at when you start digging before you add the water can also help you decide if that was an accurate test or if you want to try the test again on another day. If you think you have really clay soil, you can do a soil ribbon test. So you're just going to take about 2 teaspoons of soil from the bottom of that hole we just dug. You want to be about 4 to 6 inches down. We don't want to test that topsoil that has had a lot of organic matter added in. We want to test what the actual soil is 4 to 6 inches down into the ground. You're going to need the soil in your palm and add little drops of water until it kind of makes a putty form. Then you want to make a ball and place the right kind of at the base of your thumb, and you're going to use like your thumb and your forefinger to kind of squeeze that soil, and you're going to try to make a ribbon, and you're going to see how long you can get that ribbon to stand up straight, and that's going to give you the answers below on this chart. So if you couldn't even make a ball with this, you've got really sandy soil, and that goes all the way to you were able to make a 2-3 inch long ribbon before it broke off, then that's a lot of clay in the soil. If you have that much clay in your soil, it really probably is not going to be a great fit for a rain garden. But if it breaks off in the 1 to 2 inch range or before, then you should not have a problem augmenting that clay soil with compost and sandy soil to get a really nice rain garden that's going to soak in nicely. If anybody has any questions, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A. I'm a little bit concerned about losing my internet connection again, so I am going a little bit fast. So when you're locating your rain garden, there are some requirements that you need to make sure you are meeting. And one of those is that you want to be 10 feet away from your foundation of your house. This is kind of common sense. You'd also like to kind of be downhill, but 10 feet away is going to keep that moisture from coming back into your foundation where you really don't want it. You also need to be at least 3 feet away from your property line. So even if you have a neighbor that you really just don't like, you can't drown them out with all the water from your house. You got to keep that on your property and let it soak into the ground on your property. So the requirement there is 3 feet away from the property line for any berm that you're digging. You want to make sure you call 811 and check for buried utilities before you start your digging. You should be 5 feet away horizontally and 1 foot vertically from any utilities. The most basic ones you're going to find buried are going to be water, sewer, and electricity. If you are not connected to a sewer system, but instead have a septic system, obviously we really don't want to build this over a septic system because we don't want all that extra water going into the septic. You want to be aware of trees that are around and avoid any large tree roots. And if your property is sloped, it's not a huge issue because you can actually create your own berm at the bottom. So in this diagram, you can see this green line here showing the slope of the original grade for this property. And then you can see that this berm was built from the soil that was dug out. So everything that was dug out of the berm out of the swale for the garden got added to the bottom side to create a berm to bring it up to a level depth of 12 to 24 inches. So the requirements for a rebate for a rain garden are actually a little bit simpler than that anatomy that I showed you earlier. You aren't actually required to put in the drainage rock. I like adding the drainage rock because it really gives that water somewhere to sit and soak into the ground, especially for areas that have a slightly higher clay content in the soil. Having that drainage rock will make the garden operate a lot better, but it's not required. You can just dig it out that 12 to 24 inches and amend the soil to have enough of that sandy and compost soil in there, and then put mulch on the top to give it that effect that that soil has been loosened and you have that sandier soil, so it's going to soak in. It is, as we already said, required that it be 10 feet from the home's foundation. And there's also a requirement that you have some sort of erosion protection at the inlet of the garden. You can use river rock or concrete pads, or if you have that drainage rock, like we talked about, you can line the inflow with that. They have to have a 6 to 12 inch ponding depth, which can be partially in the mulch, but the soil does not count for that. So the mulch counts towards your ponding depth, but all that soil that you loosen up and put back in is just the overall depth of the garden. It doesn't count towards the ponding depth. It is required for the rebate that you use native plants. Bosca has a really detailed Excel spreadsheet for a plant list, and you can sort by rain garden. So they have different categories that are on their plant list, but you can sort specifically by rain garden and it'll give you some options. I'm also going to list some of my favorite ones that I use in rain gardens on my next slide. And I think that's all of our requirements now. So let's talk about some plants. So native plants that I really enjoy using, I do try to consider what is going to work really well when the garden fills up and there is ponding. So things like juncus, the common rush, wild lilac, scarlet monkey flower, purple needlegrass, and California wild rose do really well with that temporary flooding. They don't mind having their roots wet for a little bit and then drying out. Things like bee plant or blue-eyed grass or California poppy, fuchsia or coyote mint, they really don't like getting that soaked. So I tend to use those more on the raised berm areas. You can get away with yarrow or golden currant or Douglas iris and creeping wild rye kind of in either location. So I tend to use those kind of on the edges of the swale where it's starting to build up to the berm, but I don't quite want to put my bee plant there. So there are some really good options, and these are just, a handful of my favorites. But definitely take a look at that Bosca slide Excel spreadsheet to see what options might be really good for you. Other things to consider are how much shade you're going to have over the garden or how much sunlight, and make sure you're, choosing plants that are going to be happy under those conditions. Question I get a lot about plants in a rain garden is, can I add edible plants? And the basic answer is no, not in the swale part. Stick to natives there. But if you really want to have some veggies that are getting nourishment from the rain garden, you can plant them on your berm. So they will, still be able to get some nourishment from that rain garden, but they're not part of the rain garden itself. So on the berm, you can consider vining veggies or bushy berries or tall bushy herbs and veggies and citrus. So all of these listed here are great examples of those. Anything that's gonna climb up and grow and not grow directly on the ground. The things you kind of want to avoid anytime you're dealing with harvested rainwater. So this is for rain barrels or rain gardens. You really want to avoid fruits and vegetables that grow directly on the ground and that are going to be in direct contact with the water. The reason for this is we get a lot of, forest fires and other, you know, conditions and winds in the Bay Area specifically that are carrying ash and debris from things that aren't just natural burning. It's not just forests that are burning, it's all sorts of um other horrible issues that we have in the Bay Area with these forest fires and the ash coming in. So you end up with a lot of chemical ash on the houses. So you don't want to let that get concentrated on anything that's not going to filter out coming up the roots. I've read many different research studies that say this doesn't matter. The quantities that can get into the fruits and veggies are negligible. There's some really interesting ones done out of Australia because they actually require rainwater harvesting for their residents. And so they do a lot of research and study to show this, but I don't think they have the same fires issues that we have in the Bay Area. So I do think specifically for the Bay Area, stick with fruits and veggies that grow upwards and not the ones that grow on the ground. But we're not going to put them in the swale anyway. They're going to be off to the side on the berm so their roots can get some of that nice water without the plants being actually in the swale. Maintaining your garden is very, very easy. There is not nearly as much maintenance with a rain garden, I think, as with other forms of gardening. Uh, Obviously during the dry months, you are going to want to irrigate, especially when you first plant plants. It's supposed to be cooling down here next week and in the next couple of weeks. So we are getting into the planting season. It's unseasonably hot right now. I normally say you could start planting in October, but I'm thinking this year November sounds great. Um, so because it's so hot right now, but while we are, getting those plants established, we want to have them able to get more water. So planting now as we're heading into the rainy season is a great way to do that without having to irrigate as much. Weed as needed. So, check your plants, make sure that they need anything, get rid of the weeds as often as possible just so that your plants that you want there are nice and healthy. One of the things that is very unique to a rain garden is replacing the mulch. So your mulch should always be 2 to 3 inches thick minimally. And you want to use a heavier mulch that's not going to float away, such as like a composted mulch or a larger size hardwood mulch. You really want to avoid microbark or something that's really lightweight because it can float away during the ponding. But the mulch will break down and it'll create nice nutrients for your soil and it'll build into the soil. So you do have to replace that mulch regularly. One of the cool things in the Bay Area is if you call any tree company and, say, hey, I need this much mulch, they'll drop off free mulch for you. Depending on who you call and how you request it, you can try to request clean mulch that doesn't have any leaves in it. Sometimes it's harder to get that. A lot of times it has all the leaves and duff in it. But if you're, specific, like I only want hardwood mulch that doesn't have leaves, you can get it. There's also a lot of great places around that you can buy mulch as well, but you can get that replacement mulch for free from tree companies. You want to make sure you're repairing any areas of erosion, especially the inflow where your downspout is coming out into the garden. That's going to have a lot more erosion a lot more regularly. So you want to repair that and stabilize it as regularly as possible. using the splash block or cobbles below the downspout really helps. And just trying to avoid synthetic fertilizers and herbicides in your rain garden. These are water pollutants. You really don't want them soaking into the groundwater and percolating out into our streams. You want to check for and mitigate any extended ponding. So, as we talked about before, this is not a pond feature. So, we really don't want to have any standing water remaining. Anything more than, 3 days shouldn't be there. That's going to kill your vegetation. You're going to attract mosquitoes and other pests. So we want to make sure that you're just kind of checking it after the storms. If we get 3 days of rain in a row and your garden still has water because it's still raining, that's normal. But if the rain stops and then 3 days later, it still is ponding, you can still see water on the surface, something's going on there. Most often when I've had people call me up and say this is happening, they actually had an irrigation line burst and it was they had to get that fixed as opposed to it being an issue with the rain garden. So, just be aware that this should not be ponding for a long period of time. And if it is, there might be something wrong that may not even be part of the rain garden. So it's good to get that checked out. It is also a requirement that you clean your gutters every 6 months, so twice a year. It's really good practice to clean your gutters, well, now in the early fall, and then again in the spring at the end of the rainy season. We get a lot of, leaves, debris, and other stuff up in our gutters, and getting them cleaned out will help them function properly. So I know I went kind of fast, but a quick recap. When you're designing your rain garden, you want to determine the garden size and depth. You're going to do that based on our equation for harvesting potential. You're going to do that based on the soil type and that soil infiltration rate. So those 3 mathematical slides that I showed you earlier on, and I'm happy to bring those back up if anyone didn't get those, are how you're going to help determine your size and depth of your rain garden. Choosing your location, we talked about, just being aware of where trees and existing plants are. And you want to also be aware of where buildings are, 10 feet from any of the buildings and 3 feet from any property lines. If your house is uphill from a public walkway, you'll probably want to be more like 5 feet away from the public walkway so that it can't overflow and flood that. You want to think about the design shape of your swales and your berms. And this is really more about aesthetics than it is about function to some extent. In this picture on the left, it's hard to see because the garden's grown in, but the swale here is actually this really long thing right about like that. And then it widens out at the end. And we did that just based on space. There was a bike path here on the left, and there was actually a pretty significant slope on the right. And so we wanted to make sure that the water that came off that slope couldn't reach the bike path. So we had our 3 feet of distance from the bike path over. And then we made our swale a full 2 feet deep, angling down towards, it's hard to see in this picture, but there's actually a storm drain there. And we dug out a full 18 inches around the storm drain in the hopes that all that water would soak into the ground. But if it was such a big storm that it couldn't soak into the ground, rather than overflowing onto the bike path, it would be able to go into the storm drain. I've never seen it overflowing into the storm drain. I've gone down a couple times during big storms and the garden's been functioning really well. Prior to installing this garden, the city of Palo Alto had forgotten there was a storm drain there. It was completely covered with dirt and impacted, and the bike path was flooding on every storm. It doesn't flood anymore. It's been functioning a lot better. So this is a really great way to avoid flooding in areas and around your property. But again, for us doing a very narrow, the swale is only 2 to 3 feet wide in parts, and it comes down to a much wider area on the bottom. But even though it was a really narrow swale, it functions very well for that site. For other sites, like pictures I showed earlier in this presentation, doing a big round swale was far, far better for the site. So just thinking about what shape is going to work well for your property. Choosing your materials, you need to decide whether or not drain rock makes sense. A lot of that is personal preference as well as how much clay is in the soil. You got to think about which type of bioswale soil you want. Do you want to amend the soil you currently have by adding in bioswale soil, or do you want to remove all of your soil and put new soil in? And if you really wanted a hill somewhere and you're taking the soil out to use it somewhere else, this is a good opportunity to bring all new soil in. Otherwise, I usually try for about a 50-50 mix of native soil mixed in with the bioswale soil. And then deciding with cobbles and mulch what suits you the best. Usually for properties that have dogs or small kids, I recommend the mulch. It's a little easier when they decide to walk out on it. For my own garden, I have cobbles because I just like the way it looks, and then I have mulch all around it. So it's really a personal choice, but also thinking about who might be walking in your yard. Choosing your plants, again, I recommend native, and if you are going to go for the rebate, native is the way to go. Because that's a requirement for the rebate specifically. And you can buy native plants at all of our local nurseries. So I'm going to open it up to questions now. And I'm going to go back to that anatomy slide. Unless someone wants to see one of the other slides for any of the questions.
Just as we're waiting to see if anybody else has questions, I'm curious, where have you found a bee plant recently?
Oh, at a nursery?
Right.
Um, the last couple times I got it was from Grassroots Ecology,
Oh,
and
okay.
they do public sales. I don't know when their next sale is, but their nursery is located up at Foothill Park,
Right, right.
and they are a private nursery for the nonprofit, but they do plant sales twice a year usually.
Okay, I'll keep an eye out for that because I know that's a tough one to find. We have.
Yeah, and
Oh, sorry. Go
they
ahead.
are um they are really amazing. Grassroots Ecology actually goes out and harvests all the seeds within the watershed. So all of their plants are very native specifically to the watershed, as well as grown up at Foothill, which gets a little bit colder. So the plants are usually a little bit hardier than you would get at a lot of the nurseries.
That's great because a lot of nursery grown plants don't have the same kind of, they're much more vulnerable to the elements of our area. So
Yeah,
good to have something a
exactly.
little more resilient. Thank you.
There was a request to put the equations back up, so I think these are the equations we were looking for. I'm gonna leave these up for a few minutes, and then I'm gonna go to the sizing, your rain garden slide, and the soil test slide, so people can take a look at those again.
We do have another question. That's a great presentation and really helpful. Do you have to build a path to the rain garden, or does it work just to build a rain garden as a low point in your yard? Trying to think of how to fit a path from the gutter to the rain garden without making it difficult to use the walkways that cross the path.
So generally I bury a pipe from the downspout to the rain garden. So you do want to connect your downspout directly to the rain garden so that the water is actually getting there. And the easiest way to do that is to just bury a pipe. We do have another question. Will there be a recording of this presentation so that it could be shared later? Yes, absolutely. On the Bosca website, you will be able to find this presentation and previous presentations, some of them with very similar content, and a lot of them with my voice. I'm gonna go forward to the next slide, which was sizing your rain garden. This is all available on the Valley Water website. And then the soil infiltration rate. And the equation for that is very simple. It's water depth divided by elapsed time, so inches over time. We have a question about finding certified landscapers for rain gardens. The Bosco website is a great resource for that. There's also a website called Flows to Bay. So it's FLOWS. Victoria, do you know if it's the number two or the word two? I don't know
No,
off the top of my head.
let me check right now.
Yeah, maybe we can put that in the chat for folks. But it's Flows to Bay, and they have a list of installers on there. And they also have a list of rain barrel installers if you want to do a combined system.
It is flows to bay all words, not a number.
Thank you. I couldn't remember.
I couldn't either once you said that. I was second guessing myself. Thanks.
So now, Victoria, do you have emails for all the everyone who signed up?
I do. We were sent the registration list. So we should have, it'll be a comprehensive list of all those who registered, not just the attendees, but we do have a list.
Okay, so I have a list of resources that I will send you to forward to everybody.
Okay.
And it will have those websites like Flows to Bay and Bosco's websites on there, as
Okay.
well as Valley Water. And I talked about the plant list from Bosca. It's kind of hard to find on their website, so I include that in there as well.
Okay, that'd be great.
So
Thanks.
I will send that to you to forward on to everybody.
Absolutely. I do have one other question that just occurred to me as you were showing that beautiful garden along the bike path. Is there ever a danger in a situation like that of there being a hazard having a rain garden? I know 3 feet seems like a lot, but if someone on a bike were to veer off, has that ever been problematic in your knowledge?
We actually had some when we were installing that, we had some neighbors come and complain, and we were very careful to really pack the soil on the edge of the bike pack, and we were very careful to do mulch um a little bit thinner and a little bit thicker of soil there with the mulch a little bit thinner. So we didn't put any gravel in that 3 foot space, but you'll also see just how thick the plants are. Um, no one's gonna intentionally swerve into that. It would be, in a last case scenario, because the plants have grown up so thick in that area. But we do have mulch there, and I bike through mulch regularly. It does not hurt the bike. It doesn't hurt me. It's the really big cobbles you want to avoid that close to the edge.
That makes sense. Thank you.
But that in this particular instance, that concern was raised. Bring that picture back up, maybe. Oh, maybe not. My computer.
Well, that being the case, it also looks like our questions have slowed down. It might be a good time to quit while we're ahead of the technical difficulties.
Yeah, I am so sorry. Tonight has been an odd one with my technical difficulties.
Well, given how our beginning was, I think this went very smoothly once the participants entered. So I'm glad we worked out most of the kinks ahead of time.
So, yep, thank you for your patience going through
Absolutely.
that.
No problem at all. I'm just glad it worked out.
So, okay, well, thank you very much everybody for your time, and hopefully everybody's staying cool.
Yes, indeed. Oh, thank you. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time.